so let's get into it because there's so much to talk about. First off, I want to talk about tomorrow's anniversary. Tomorrow is January 6th. I can't believe it's been 3 years, right? There was an AP headline that CNN was vilifying, which basically said, one attack, two interpretations, or something like that, between how Trump and Trump supporters are looking at January 6th versus President Biden and what I would say are, rational Americans. How do you see January 6th, this anniversary, especially in a presidential year, playing out both for Trump and for Biden?
The Republican Party is still in denial. In fact, the latest poll shows 80% of Republicans accept the fact that Donald Trump won the election of 2020 and that there was no real violence or insurrection around the Capitol 3 years ago tomorrow. I believe this is a very distressing number. More than that, I just finished reading Liz Cheney's book, and if I could recommend one book for everybody to read, it would be Liz Cheney's new book. Her account of what happened on January 6th and beyond is absolutely spellbinding, stupefying, and horrific. And I must tell you that when one reads the accounts of the actions of the new Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Johnson, had we known, had Liz Cheney's book come out before his election, there, I would have hoped, would have been an outrage against his election. So this is really something you will note last night in the town halls with Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis on CNN, that no one really mentioned the question. Was it an insurrection?
Right.
Did Donald Trump really commit crimes? And interestingly enough, Nikki, while we are talking right now, the Supreme Court, theoretically, all 9 justices are together, are considering several different facets of this, including whether Trump should be removed from the ballot because of insurrection. Let me be crystal clear. I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I would like the voters to have the opportunity to vote up or down. I believe that's the American way. But if you ask me personally, was there an insurrection? Was there an attempt to obstruct the counting of the electoral vote? Was there an attempted coup by Donald Trump? The answer most assuredly is yes. And the real contrast, which you pointed out so eloquently a moment ago, is between the speech Joe Biden will give in Delaware at Valley Forge versus Donald Trump's True Social and his interpretation. It is two visions of America. And all I can say is, America, we are going to have to choose what path we want to take. And I sure as heck hope it's not the path that Donald Trump is recommending.
Absolutely. I heard you actually on KCBS with Pat Thurston saying that you wanted to go before the voters. And I was driving in my car and just going to be honest, John, I was like, but if we allow the voters to decide, that would mean that the Supreme Court is allowing Trump on the ballot, which means that the insurrection clause in our own Constitution means nothing. And if that means nothing, then what does the Constitution mean?
You have to have a conviction, Nikki.
It doesn't say that in the, as far as I understand, it does not say anything about a conviction.
No, but I understand the practical politics we are in this country. There needs to be a court judgment that says that Donald Trump was involved and committed an act of insurrection. That is the Supreme Court's job. I go back to the United States versus Richard Nixon on the question of presidential immunity. Presidents do have immunity, but not if they commit a crime. And that was the point of the United States versus Richard Nixon, that Nixon may have had the right of executive privilege and a certain amount of immunity, but if there was a crime, then the American people had a right to know it. And that Supreme Court decision was 8-0, with Bill Rehnquist recusing himself. Clarence Thomas will in all likelihood not recuse himself, although he should.
Right.
But the simple truth is that the Supreme Court is now on the spot. And we are all going to make our decisions on Donald Trump based on what the Supreme Court says. There's no question that insurrection was committed, that sedition was committed. But you have to have a legal case, in my mind, no matter what the Constitution says, which affirms the fact that Donald Trump broke the law. And we now have an opinion from the Colorado Supreme Court, divided court, saying that he did participate in insurrection. And we have the Secretary of State of one state, which is Maine, which is not, by the way, an elected position, who has articulated it clearly in her memorandum. We now have Oregon, where the case is also being pursued. So my point is, let the Supreme Court vote. But one thing we better understand in this election year, that who is president of the United States matters. Who nominates people for the Supreme Court matters. We know that when Donald Trump ran in 2016, he swore that he would appoint justices to the court who would rescind Roe v. Wade. He did. Therefore, let it all be understood, something that you've heard me say over and over again over nearly 30 years on the radio in this area, and that is that we are not just voting for a president, we are voting for the future of the nation with the Supreme Court. So let me tell you, I believe insurrection was committed. Let's see what the court says. And one other quick point, I know you've got many questions. If the Supreme Court rules in Donald Trump's favor, I believe the outrage will be so great that Trump will have no chance at being elected president of the United States.
But if the Supreme Court rules in Trump's favor, I hope you're right. I hope the outrage is so huge. But of course, he's going to use that as, see, the highest court in the land says I didn't do anything wrong. How can we then, as a nation, believe that enough voters are going to be outraged that he doesn't end up right back in the White House? I just don't know how this plays out to keep him out of the White House unless the Supreme Court does say he's not allowed to run.
Nikki, 1 year from today, you and I will be talking. We will know the result of the presidential election.
Yes, we will.
One other thing that I should say is I was shocked last night that in the town halls that were conducted with DeSantis and Haley, that no one asked the question, did Donald Trump participate in an insurrection? It was never asked, and it should have been asked.
Yes.
And they should have had the opportunity to answer. But of course, the moderators, in my judgment, did not do a very good job. And certainly the questions from Republicans were not willing to confront that situation. So there was a lot missing. Now, there will be a CNN debate between Haley and DeSantis next Wednesday evening. I will be listening carefully to see whether or not it is raised at that point. But you understand the practical politics. Republican voters still are enamored of Donald Trump. According to the polls, as I indicated, 80% of Republicans believe the nonsense he spews. So we have a serious problem in the Republican Party. And for the Republican Party to be a viable party in this next election, it has to repudiate all of this. When I say viable, I believe that the Republicans will certainly lose the House. I think they may well lose the Senate. It's not only this issue, it's also the question of a woman's right to choose. We have seen in 7 states, which are really very states that supported Trump, an absolute repudiation of the idea that someone can control a woman's body other than a woman. And let me assure you of something. I look at that as a man. If somebody told me that I could or could not do something with my body, I'd tell them to take a flying leap. And that's what I hope the American people are going to do.
Let's talk a little bit more about Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. It seems like Nikki Haley's breathing down Trump's neck as far as, being the next option if he does not get the nomination. And then DeSantis seems to, in some instances, there was one headline where he says Fox News people never criticize Trump because they're so concerned someone may yell at them. What do you think about both Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis? Do you think that they're really capitalizing on the fact that so many people and January 6th are criticizing Trump?
Well, last night was no runs, no hits, no errors. Neither DeSantis nor Haley made any serious error. But were they outstanding in their presentations? The answer is no. They're appealing to their base. And I have to tell you, coming in number 2 is not something that separates you in a presidential race. Now, and I know that if you ask me who lost for president in any election year, I can tell you. But do you remember who came in second in a primary or a caucus? And the answer is no. All that matters is the final bottom line. To be very blunt with you, I'm disappointed in the Republican Party. I've said that before, and I'll say it again. There ought to be a viable opposition. Chris Christie, who clearly articulates his opposition to Donald Trump, is still not making any headway. And that, to me, is quite something as well. So, look, in the end, the Republican Party, in all likelihood, will choose Donald Trump. And if they choose Donald Trump, the battle lines will be drawn. I will be listening. I don't know if it's tonight or tomorrow, because there was some question about the weather at Valley Forge when Joe Biden is going to deliver his address, which is scheduled for Valley Forge. But I can't wait to hear it, because he will make the indictment. So let's see what happens.
All right, so let's move on to the other big story this week, which of course was the Epstein list. Politically, John, it seems like Bill Clinton's name is mentioned a lot. He's not running for president, right? Trump is friends with him. What do you think the political fallout of this, if anything, is going to come? Because it seems to me it's a whole lot of buildup, and I'm not quite sure if there's been any bombshells.
Yeah. I don't think there's been any bombshell thus far. We have to wait and see till everything's out. But Epstein is dead. The issue is now, as far as I'm concerned, not a relevant political issue. And so I don't think the Epstein matter will play a factor in the campaign.
Yeah, and I don't even think Trump's name being mentioned. Everybody's seen the pictures in the past of him and Epstein and Maxwell together. So it's not
no smoking gun. There's no smoking gun.
Exactly. Now, as far as President Biden and the Democrats, now, President Biden, I just played yesterday one of his campaign speeches. He had a ton of, video from January 6th, protecting democracy. Never said Trump's name, of course, but is Biden doing enough to counter the brainwashing, I'll just use that word, that Trump has over all of his followers? Because while on one hand, I watched that campaign video yesterday, John, and I was like, okay, yeah, I get what he's saying. On the other hand, I just don't know if it's landing with enough Americans.
Not yet. That's why the speech that Joe Biden is going to give is going to be so critical. It is the opening shot in a campaign, which clearly is at this point, and I want to emphasize at this point, is going to be a replay between Biden and Trump.
Yeah.
And the question is, can Joe Biden land these hits on Trump and convince enough people? Look, Nikki, I'm going to be blunt with you. I do not believe the American people are going to elect Donald Trump to another term as president. I believe there is too much opposition. And I think Joe Biden is going to spearhead that opposition. But there is no doubt, and I say this as a Biden supporter, that many people are asking, not so much about his policies. If you saw the employment numbers this morning, the economy is doing much better than anyone expected. That's why the Republicans aren't mentioning the economy or inflation as they used to be.
Right.
But the simple fact is Joe Biden's age going to be a factor? And the answer is yes, it is. The American people are going to have to choose between two men. And this is amazing to me. Do you realize that both of the leading candidates for president of the United States are older than I am? And that says a whole lot. I think that if it is Biden versus Trump, I believe that Joe Biden will win, and I believe he will win overwhelmingly. And I say that bluntly. I think all you have to do is take a look at states, 7 states, where the issue of a woman's right to choose, and I'm not saying abortion, I'm saying a woman's right to choose is on the ballot. The Republicans are losing wherever they look. And there's now talk that there will be such a measure on the Florida ballot. Well, let me tell you something. I hope it is on the Florida ballot, because I can assure you the people of Florida will vote overwhelmingly for a woman's right to control her own body. And so these are the issues. But you know what's amazing? And I've been in politics a long time, and there's nothing I like more than foreign policy, to be very blunt with you. No one's talking about Ukraine.
Right.
No one's talking about what's happening in the Middle East. No one talks about American action in Iraq or against the Houthi rebels. No one is talking about the substance of the Russian attack in Ukraine, which has been overwhelming and brutal. No one is talking about these issues. And frankly, Richard Nixon once said to me, 70% of a president's time is devoted to the question of foreign policy. He was right. And the absence, there was a minor question for DeSantis about the Ukraine, which I thought he handled very poorly. And Nikki Haley is great when it comes to the Middle East. If you agree with her positions, she's absolutely solid, but there's no depth to what we do next. And I think that is going to be the real question. Let me not ignore China. And I say this because China is still threatening to invade Taiwan. If that were to happen, you can be assured we would be on the verge of a major catastrophe. The world is aflame, and no one is really debating the issues. And I think that is really something that needs to be confronted. And I think the one advantage Joe Biden has over Donald Trump is Joe Biden knows what he's doing in foreign policy. Oh, they can raise forever the question of our evacuation of Afghanistan.
Of
But
course.
let me remind you, it was Donald Trump who set up that evacuation with the dates. And that's going to be something else that's a factor. There are no easy answers, do you understand? But it is a choice between two visions of the world, two visions of America, two visions of where we are in terms of our future. And I believe that the Democrats will have the upper hand. Question you have to ask is, what happens if Joe Biden is not the Democratic candidate for president? What happens if something happens between now and the convention? The answer is that we don't know. I can tell you if something happens to Biden and Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States, if that were to happen, the last incumbent president who had been vice president, who ascended to the presidency on the death of a president, was Chester Alan Arthur. He was denied the nomination in 1884, the Republican nomination. He's the last incumbent president to be denied the nomination. And even when Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan confronted each other in 1976, Jerry Ford won the nomination, didn't win the election. So Kamala Harris is important. And people keep asking me about Gavin Newsom. And my answer is Gavin has made clear he will not run for president against Joe Biden. He will not run against Kamala Harris. And I think he's got to bide his time. And if I may be so bold as to say, if you watched the debate, so-called, between
Newsom and
Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom, they both lost in my judgment.
It wasn't that good of a debate. Okay, one more question. If it's not Trump, if whatever happens in the courts and it's Nikki Haley versus Biden, where do you put your money?
I don't think Nikki Haley can be elected president. First of all, look at her stand on a woman's right to choose.
I know. I would never vote for Nikki Haley.
I tell you, not to answer a question directly about the cause of the Civil War without mentioning slavery. Remember, please, the Republican Party was founded to battle slavery. Remember what Lincoln said? A house divided against itself cannot stand. A nation cannot exist half slave and half free. Remember, it was the Republicans who were responsible for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the Constitutions. That the idea that Nikki Haley doesn't know her history is absolutely astounding to me. Now, will she, if she is the Republican nominee for president, be a formidable candidate? The answer is yes. Do I think she can be elected president? No. But then again, I've been wrong many times, as you well know.
Never forgive you for that.
I know.
If everyone doesn't know what we're talking about, the night that Trump was elected, John kept trying to tell me that there was no way that Hillary Clinton was going to lose until the truth came out.
And then
was devastated.
We were all shattered.
John Rothmann, find his podcast, follow him along at Around the Political World with John Rothmann. You can find it on all your favorite podcast apps. John, I always appreciate your insight, your expertise, and your friendship.